I'm so glad 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 of being remembered. Why don't you say to me? Say time and time again. I feel God. I get that. Look, I get that. Looking straight for me. Why should I?
Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to the Race Exchange session number 6. Thank you guys for joining today. Before we go into it, we're going to be discussing aesthetics, adoption of culture, and the big A word, which I'm sure hopefully people knew what I was talking about, but appropriation. So before we do, can I go around the screen and get everyone to just share who they are and why they're here? I'll start with Jill. Actually, she's the first, top right in my screen. I'll go around. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Jill. I am here because I think that it's really important to talk about race and to talk about those kind of things in our roles as humans, in our life, in our jobs and things. So I think it's been like appropriate for me to realize about white privilege and to think about that in terms of how I sit in society, and how I can bolster that and through like the work that I do, which is essentially with a lot of children of colour, from a right background. So I think to do more, to talk more, and to do more in my role, in my job, and also in society as well. So yeah, that's why I'm here.
Thank you, Jill. I'll go round. So I'm going to go down to Joe.
Hello. Yeah, so I'm Joe, and really I'm here just to start trying to have more discussions about race, really, and so that I can try and understand racial injustices and figure out how I can contribute to being in the fight against racial injustice, really.
Excellent. Thank you, Joe. I'm going to go down to Ben next.
Hi, Ben. I'm here. Obviously, the current climate has everyone's all to be here at this moment in time. I'm trying to better myself to be able to help not only just identify my own white privilege, but try and like be better an ally, if anything.
Thank you, Ben. And Dee next.
I'm Dee. I use she, her pronouns. I'm trans. I'm here because over the past 4 years, I've continuously seen and complicitly let slide by racist or bigoted language from family and family members continuously on Facebook. And at this moment, I still don't know how to tackle that in a way that will be conducive to something much more positive rather than push them further into their bigotry and hatred. And trying to learn basically ways that other people may have managed that, or if they haven't, or otherwise. But yeah.
Thank you, Dee. Yeah, that is a big issue at the moment for a lot of people. I do appreciate. Chris next.
Hi, I'm Chris. I'm here to continue the conversation and to keep the idea of race at some kind of forefront of my mind, because I'm aware that although it's something that I care about, it becomes invisible to me, and I want it to stay visible.
Thank you very much. And last but not least, Yemi.
Hi, I'm Yemi. I am here because I really loved this idea of this race exchange, an idea that I think is really beautiful. It's the way to kind of bring conversations that we might have amongst people our closest people that may not be of the same colour as us, or maybe not. Spaces that we find safe or that we find unsafe, and trying to see how we can make most spaces more comfortable to talk about these kind of things. And much like Dee, the idea of trying to open up a conversation rather than pushing people to extremes either way.
Thank you. Absolutely. I mean, it's pretty much the same sentiment from why I started this. I also started this because I felt in the last months, obviously all the events, that I was finally kind of confident enough to talk about race, and to remind people that even though I seem to be having an okay time, I've not had an okay time, and it has always been a thing. And now I feel confident and strong enough to be able to have conversations with people about it in a way that helps us both. So yes, it's good to hear that everyone is here on the kind of same page, but also different pages. There's different struggles. It's like, could be your job role, could be your family, could be just day-to-day life and just wanting to be more sociable about it. So as we know, this is about confessional conversations, so generally personal experience. Of course, we're going to bring in aspects of like media and culture that might come in, but I'm going to start with talking about my personal experience of this big idea of aesthetics and adoption of culture and appropriation. So obviously I live in Britain, and it's a multicultural country, a multicultural country that actually isn't very well integrated. I think that's obviously a lot to do with the issues that we have. So it's multicultural, so it's very nice to be able to see saris, head wraps, kimonos, world food restaurants all over the place, and we're so lucky to have that. Yet obviously every cultural everything that we see from another culture has a context, and I think this is where appropriation and things like that become an issue, because it's then on the individual or family or group to either accept that there is a context and either try and learn about it, try and appreciate it, or just do it regardless of the context in which that might sit. And that's where it comes into a bit of contention. For me, one of my earliest memories of kind of understanding the struggle about, because obviously hair comes up a lot, it seems to be really common, and I think there's a reason for that, because hair is hair. It comes, it comes out of you, it grows out of you, it's part of your body. I'm not saying it doesn't make any kind of fashion statements as important, but for me, hair is the biggest thing that I can speak about. And I remember being 9 years old, and I went into my mum's room and I tried to cut a fringe out of my hair. And obviously I just ruined it. Basically, I cut it, it stood up like this. My mum came in screaming, "What are you doing?" I was just like, "I wanted a fringe." Clearly didn't understand that my hair was different to all of my friends' hair. And as a result, I lost I had to cut all my hair off. She had to cut all my hair off so it was the same size. It's a really funny story to look back at. But the reality of the situation is that I spent most of my coming of age years wanting to look something different to what I was, and that was a very physical that way that happened, and many things have happened. I straightened my hair, relaxed it chemically, because obviously we know that when you're in a predominantly white country, obviously you're going to see more people who look like that, and that's absolutely fine. That's what you expect. I guess where the problem lies is why it has to be this aspirational adoration, the better option. That's where I think it falls into issues, because it's like, yeah, if you're straightening your hair because you just want your hair to be straight, fair enough. If you're doing it because you think you'll fit in better and because people think you're better, then we have a problem. And that's definitely my personal experience with hair. And it took me until about 6 years ago, when I was 23 and 24, I finally went out with just my natural hair for the first time in front of all my friends and everything. And everyone said it, and everyone was like, "Yemi, you've got your hair out." I was like, "No, I know, like, please don't." And it was just very strange to think that I'd hidden behind this idea of trying to look a certain way, and everyone seemed to actually think I looked better when I wasn't trying. And you're just like, "Oh my God, I've wasted all this time." But then what happens is you get situations where braids and things like that, anything that's kind of like African hair that isn't necessarily, I don't know, whatever the term is, professional, whatever, and people start to kind of replicate it in their own ways, and then you're like, well, I spent most of my time like trying not to do that because people told me it wasn't good, and now how can you get to just go out and have fake dreads or whatever, and it's like, that is not I don't think there's a problem with people doing that. I think you always have to do it wearing on your sleeve that I know I'm doing it, and this is the context of how I'm doing it, and this is the reasoning. And if you haven't thought about those reasonings, then maybe you shouldn't. And that's kind of what it comes down to in terms of hair, and that is very much just one small arm of any kind of adoption of culture. I think, to me, braids are like they're an art, they're a craft. There's something that's very unique about the texture of my hair that you do with it because of the way it is. So I do think there is something to be thought about when people do want to take the stylings on as a fashion. But I don't disagree with it. I just think, you know, if you're gonna do it, just do it, and do it in pride. Don't do it with a question mark, because if you do it with a question mark, you probably shouldn't put it on. I'll kind of wrap this up a bit. I've got some other bits that I'd want to kind of share. But in terms of like why, I don't know, why kind of it's difficult. So there's an example I see a lot, which is West African print getting worn a lot, especially DJ nights. A lot of DJs and stuff will kind of have adopted this new thing. There's now this like homogenous West African print that everyone just goes around wearing, and like it's beautiful. Actually, it reminds me of my culture. It's so great. But do you wear that with Pride for Africa, or do you wear that blankly? Then obviously we get into clothes, and I can only speak from a Black African point of view. I can't necessarily speak from Caribbean. I can't speak from Asian or South Asian point of view. We don't have anyone here in the room who is of that heritage that I know of. But if you have any experiences of that, obviously it'd be great to hear other kind of stories from different heritages. And the final thing I probably want to add to the mix before we open the discussion is it's strange, isn't it, to think that like you can appropriate every other culture but white, and it's like, does anyone have any ideas on what aspects of white or white heritage do you think, if it actually exists, can be appropriated or have been appropriated, or is it just doesn't work that way, you know? And that's kind of a big kind of ... for me. I don't really know. So I don't know if anyone had anything to kind of share on what I've just said. Please feel free to raise your hand or just kind of like bring a... Yeah, absolutely. Chris?
I think it's interesting, the idea of if it's possible to appropriate white culture, because it's like, what is that? Has it been like, because it's pervasive, right? So it's all around us. It's almost like you're swimming through it. And I wonder what it is. I wonder if necessarily, like, I wonder if that's also a concern, that there's a sort of like a lack of knowledge of what white culture actually is. So do we go back to like sort of Nordic things and like with Viking tattoos or something like that, or but it has become a melding pot, this country as well, I think, and it has been muddied because people do appropriate so much without even thinking about it. Aware that I'm wearing this shirt here with some stripes on it, I don't know where this design's from. It was just a nice design that I picked up and wore. And again, it's not something that I interrogated before I thought of buying it. So yeah, I am also left with a question mark.
I guess with that point, part of it is like, well, the shop in which you bought it would have given you, hopefully given you some idea of what you're wearing, where you're buying it from, not necessarily where it was made, but maybe what the design was. Might be a certain type of high street store, a certain type of vintage store, I don't really know. But that's, for me, that answered that question a little bit. However, I do think it's interesting that we still, you know, can we take things like denim? I'm wearing a denim shirt. Does that belong to a culture or race? Not too sure. Could be seen to be. Interesting point. Thank you, Chris. Jill?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. I don't. What is white culture? But I suppose, like, this is personal to my family anyway. Like, I remember my mum saying about, like, my family's Scottish, and my mum knows loads about tartans, about all the different clans and stuff, because my grandma used to make kilts. And, you know, for her to see tartan in a shop that has no recollection to Scotland, I mean, it's a similar thing, isn't it? It's an appropriation of a pattern, and it's identity to a certain culture, But I'm not saying it's wrong that tartan, you know, because like you were saying, African print is a lot of places. People wear it who aren't from Africa. So therefore, wearing tartan is good, I think. But I don't know, it's a bit of a contextual thing, I guess, because so much of culture is appropriated in everything that we know and see and do. It's really hard to extract it, if you know what I mean. Like there's some really obvious things that are bad, like a negative, but I don't know where. I don't know. It's a really strange. It's a hard question when you something's quite fluid, whereas some things are really like, okay, you've taken that out of context and you're doing that in a wrong way. But I don't know. Things. I think the hair thing, like the point that you make, when people are sort of doing, yeah, I don't know. That I don't like that, but I don't know.
No, I think that's a really good
things. I don't know. Sometimes it's quite. Is it a celebration or is it a? I think you're on. I think I agree with you about the hair thing. I think I would never put my hair in braids. One, it wouldn't do it. Just my hair's not made for it, like you say. So therefore, why would I bother? So you know, and also like, yeah, it's something that suits Afro hair, not straight blonde hair. So yeah, and yeah, and I wouldn't personally do it, but I might wear an African print because I'd like the print. I don't know. Is that bad?
But then no, but that's not bad at all. Then it's up to you to know what that print is about. Maybe when you're buying it, maybe you can find out more about it. So if someone does want to bring you up on it because they see the white skin wearing something that they know, they're like, do you know where that's from? And you can be like, yes, I do. And then you can have a conversation. That should be a lovely sharing moment, hopefully. You know, there's people out there who are of different emotional capacities, and some people will just get directly angry, but we can diffuse that in certain ways, and I think that is by knowing where things come from. I think Dee was next, and then Ben. Thank you.
I'm just want to check, is the audio okay? There's quite a lot of sound coming from here.
The audio is not too bad. There is a bit of background noise. I can hear you though. Yeah,
okay, that's good then. Yeah, I mean, I was thinking, like, in regards of that, like, in terms of tartan, or in terms of, I think, I had my point in my head a second ago. Where's that point gone? In regards of, like, things such as tartan or African print, is that we know, like, in a way that when things get taken or they get adopted, we know at some point that's going to be eroded away from its original point and completely disappear. In terms of African print or anything like that, I don't know where in Africa that comes from. I don't know where that is. It's talking about Africa print in its overall contextualized compared to tartan. Yeah, broadly compared to specifically like tartan, which kind of links itself and stamps itself to Scotland itself. And then it's talking about the kind of like, we're in like an age of internet, we're in an age of information and things, and it's like, because that stuff is so accessible to us, why don't we actually go and search for it? Why don't we try and figure out those kind of topics or information, and it's rather than allow those things to get eroded over time. And I think it's that kind of small knowledge, and it's in the back of everyone's heads, where it's like, if you start wearing these things, if you start taking that culture, it's going to be erased. And we know it will do, because when the macro get hold of it and it appears in the shops and someone who's 12 picks it up and wears it, that's just the top they really love, rather than any of the like history or appropriation or effectively stealing of those designs and things. So yeah, so that's why I think like those areas of difference have, yeah.
I think you're absolutely right. That there's still like, it's like there's a respect thing there, isn't there? It's like at the end of the day, it'd be all good and well if we were sharing it if Africans weren't looked down upon. Do you know what I mean? So if there wasn't this layer of like Africans being these, you know, I know the horrible stereotypes not everyone thinks those things anymore. However, they do exist. You know, dirty, this, poor, etc. Yet when it comes to something like this, you're willing to take that part of. And I think you're absolutely right. There is a respect thing. It will get eroded over time. So it either has to be done in the right way or just probably not at all. Ideally, however, you know, the world's a big place. Thank you, Dee. Ben?
Yeah, interesting with what Dee was saying about erosion as well. I'll come back to that in a second. But my original point was about experiences of appropriation, in like, but not with an African print, but having lived in Japan for some time and seeing there's a very big factor of like tourism where people would rent out kimonos or get people dressed up as geisha girls as well. it was kind of like, where's the point of which where the culture itself is benefiting from the actual monetary value of this and showing their culture coming out, or in comparison to, is it just people coming for tokenism? Are they really learning anything? It was hard. There's even now at some points where people just take pictures of actual geisha women out in Kyoto, for instance, which now I think has actually become illegal. It's people using this idea of, right, okay, we don't really want to learn anything about it. It's just a very token pretty thing. As you were saying, just taking rather than actually trying to learn or give anything back to that. And on again, these about erosion as well. We find it a lot in club culture as well. You have the African print as well, in a lot of nights depicting things like world music without any kind of description to any real areas, but also like dress. Like I know a couple of festivals around in the US have banned it, but Native American headdress as well was something that was prominent, like really just kind of cheapening the idea of going out and dressing in any way you can without any kind of real respect, all that. So things like going out to festivals and wearing bindis and things like that, it seems more and more people, especially whitewashed festivals, tend to really use other cultures to monopolize on it as a whole macro idea. So yeah,
absolutely, exactly. And that's an interesting point to come back to, maybe kind of festival culture, because obviously festival culture is celebration. So in a festival field, you don't think that I'm taking the mick out of someone by putting bindis on my head. However, would they feel comfortable with seeing you do that? I don't know. So that's a really good point. Thank you, Ben. I think Joe had his hand up next, and then we'll go up to Emmy. Oh, sorry, I think you're on mute still.
Yeah, so I was just going to say on the question of whether it's possible to appropriate something within white culture, I guess it just sort of comes back to what the definition of cultural appropriation is. And I read somewhere before this discussion just that this person's definition of cultural appropriation was that it's the misuse of a group or culture's art by someone who has the power to redefine it and hence divorce it from the original people who created it. So I guess,
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so to appropriate white culture, it would have to be a more powerful white group misappropriating another like white culture that has historically been oppressed, like for example, maybe like the Irish or the Scottish or something like that. But why it isn't possible for, for example, for like a West African person to appropriate like British culture. That
is a really good point, actually, especially like, we have festivities around the calendar, the UK calendar, that are about different cultures and stuff, and you can come and join in and get involved in parties and festivities, but I guess is the line drawn to dressing up like like Irish people or Scottish people, because there is a lot of sensitivity. The UK is the UK, but England is a different country to Scotland, Ireland and Wales, so that's a really interesting point, I think, going back to kind of what whiteness is, what aspects of white culture can be appropriated, and if that's possible. Thank you, Joe. Emmy.
Hey, so a few different things, I guess. One of them is that I struggle quite a lot being mixed race, being half white Scottish, half Tunisian. In Tunisia, there are black people, but predominantly it's dark skinned as opposed to black, so brown. And I struggle quite a bit with, because I am seen as white often, if I'm in a headdress of some sort, instantly someone assumes I'm from somewhere else, and they might I'm trying to get to my point. I guess it's a really thin line a lot of the time, and much like what's already been said, I think the appropriation point comes from if somebody is in a perceived level of power and is taking something from somebody who is a minority, particularly if their history has been completely eradicated by said
or not taught at all,
or not taught at all,
yeah.
then it's very difficult to then argue that you aren't appropriating when you've appropriated every other part of the culture. Often there's this kind of argument of like, okay, well, is braids the only thing that's part of Black culture? No, but it is one of the only things that exists now because it has been eradicated. A lot of the history has been eradicated. And so, like, I mean, even in the history of hair, like, there's so many beautiful books that you can read that talk about sending messages in braids and all sorts of stuff that I didn't know, that I guarantee the lady who's walking down the street rocking boxer braids doesn't know. And so it's about, much like what you've already said, it's about really learning where that comes from, and do you have the right to do that? Like, even if I claim, you know, I'm African and proud to be half African, that I have no business wearing braids because my hair it's not the same. It's not that 4B texture. There's no need for me to do that. It's also not a part of Tunisian culture. So why would I, you know?
Yeah.
Interestingly, when you were talking about festivals and stuff, my funniest experience of cultural appropriation, I think, was at a festival. And it was a white lady who had dreadlocks and was wearing a bindi. Came up to me, and I just walked into one of these shops and I saw a Hamza, which is like, for Fatima's hand, it kind of looks like that for people that don't know. It's this really beautiful piece of artwork, and it's used quite a lot in North African and Berber culture to ward off evil spirits. And I found like this really beautiful necklace, and like, I didn't think anything of it at the time. I just thought, oh, that's a beautiful necklace, I'm going to buy that. And I walked out, put it around my neck, and this woman comes up to me and tells me that it's cultural appropriation. Completely. At first I laughed because I thought, surely you have to be self-aware, surely. But unfortunately it wasn't. So she wasn't. So it was a case of, what do you do in that situation then? Like, okay, so you've perceived me as a white person with this thing that is actually part of my culture, and you're telling me that I have appropriated something whilst also appropriating from another culture. And then I walk away from that. I ended up kind of just going, okay, that's nice to meet you, see you later, because you know, why would I get into an argument about it? But it's one of those situations where you go, okay, so am I appropriating actually? Because I've grown up in Britain, and I've got a British gaze, a Western gaze, and so what does that then say about it?
I think you picked on something really interesting there. Like, I think by default, in some ways, just by being in Britain and Britain being such a white supremacist place, you will naturally be within a, unless British power was actually like invoking people to be proud and invoking integration of culture and stuff like that. Because the powers that be don't do that, we then fall within their remit of what's going on. So actually, yeah, I think in a lot of ways there is ways that we might just be in Britain, and that's the case until the powers that be take responsibility for allowing people to show pride and integration and adoption of culture as a thing that everyone, as a not a rule but a way in which everyone should live, like, you know, a moral value that we should all share. I think it is always going to maybe just be a bit of a question mark. However, coming from the person that it seemed to come from, it was quite ironic. So I don't really know how you would deal with that any better at all, to be honest. I think that is just one of those nuanced moments where you kind of just, you've just got to let it go, and hopefully maybe you know, it won't happen anytime soon again, or maybe you'd be better equipped to actually deal with it if it happens again. I don't know. Does anyone got anything to share kind of on those points, kind of like talked a bit about festival culture and a little bit about, I don't know, I guess not looking a certain way, living in England. It's just strange, isn't it? I think one thing I wanted to kind of bring up as maybe an example, it's a kind of a media example, not anything that directly affects me, but an interesting one, and it's Ariana Grande. being there was a whole scandal around her playing up to looking more Latino as a way of getting those audiences. So Ariana Grande isn't, she's Italian, she's like quite white Italian actually, but she has been, I don't know what you call it, browned up, Latinoed up in on purpose specifically. I'm not saying it's her fault, it could be her PR team, whatever it is, music industry, in order to attract a Latino audience who in one side of things in America are actually heavily oppressed in their day-to-day life. So I guess like maybe the question there is a little bit about people in high places like that, their responsibility, they're like, they have a responsibility to, I don't know, to, I don't, it's strange. It's actually, it's a really sad part of the music industry, I think, when people have to feel like they have to black up or brown up or or potentially even white up to be seen. Ben, I saw your hand, and then Chris.
Yeah, just a quick one on that. No, it's the same. The polarized opposite as well for, say, dancehall cultures as well, where dancehall artists will end up screwing with blue soap to make the skin lighter. So it's it's interesting to see the whole kind of concept of the polar opposite factor of just, because I also have friends who have said when they were growing up, one of our friends is Tamil, saying that they would try and stay out of sun so their skin wouldn't get darker from getting tan. So
I've done that plenty of times in my life. Yeah. It's a sad reality, but it's something I'm willing to admit. It's definitely something that happens. I think, I don't know, when it comes to this is why when these things become complex, it kind of all roots back to racism, doesn't it? Because then you're just like, well, if we weren't as racist, perhaps we wouldn't, these things wouldn't be as much of an issue. Yeah, thank you, Ben. Chris?
Yeah, I was thinking when you were mentioning the sort of music industry, and I was wondering about it, is it a lot of the supremacism, is it driven by industry and branding and sort of money in that way, so that they create or maybe perpetuate the dominant culture? And certainly like that sort of that the idea of appropriation and like brand fetishism is certainly a thing that happens. And so say like Coca-Cola going to, you know, changing its brand slightly. I think they do masala Coke in certain places in India and things like that. So is that appropriation? Is that integration? And
I would say that is, it's like a marketing method of like, you've got standardization, you have global standardization of products, and then you have like, you can make it more contextually relative. And I think it's probably better to do that anyway. But I think what you are touching upon is capitalism at the end of the day, basically. We live in a capitalist culture. However long it's going to last, we don't know, but we're always kind of fighting up against it. And as long as capitalist culture is still in place, I think, you know, in some ways it's going to get broken down, but I don't know how long that's going to take. As long as that's happening, racism, appropriation, if capitalism is using that as a tool, it's actually going to be very difficult to fight off, which is not to be too negative, but it's very true. Capitalism is a massive perpetuator of appropriation. And then also, if they're going to do that, maybe they should give more money to the people who they're appropriating in that case. Emmy?
I was just thinking about the fact that this has now become a conversation, this kind of appropriation thing, that when we were young, perhaps it wasn't as much of a conversation publicly. And like, I wonder, this is not me prescribing anything, but from my own experience of like it's first generation immigrant, there was like this idea of trying to assimilate as much as possible. Whereas I feel like a lot of second gen, third gen are really proud of their heritage, particularly if their heritage comes from places other than Britain. And how that's why we're now starting to have those conversations, because it is a little bit more nuanced. I don't know. Let's put it out there.
It is. I think, like, essentially, I find that in any situation, it's the individual person of who, so I represent like a Black African culture, and I could, you know, channel my issues around people using prints in an angry way or whatever, but I don't. I choose to do it in a conversational or educational way. But you are always going to get some kind of backlash, and I think what some of the better ways is for the blame to be put on the people who are running it. I think in terms of that, I don't know. Dee, did you have something to say? And then Jill.
Yeah, and I think, like as you were saying in regard to blame, that's where there's like quite a complexity around it as well, because it's, as we said about capitalism itself, but we talk about who is the capitalist person that's reinforcing or making this. It's our governments, it's our the people in those structures, and it's like when we try to go to the conversations to people that are close to us to call them out, saying, yeah, you might have seen that, yeah, you might like that, but in the end, like the trail of funds or the trail of money or the respect between the supplier, the buyer, and the manufacturer, and then the original designer who's been removed from that process is like so convoluted that we don't know their actual names. They're just entities and structures. When it's like with people, when we say to them, you've done something wrong, the immediate thing that they've been grown and raised and taught to do is like, no, you have a right to be however you want to be and no one should tell you otherwise.
Yeah.
And if they're doing that, then they're bad, because it's like we have a much more kind of sinister and self-governing form of oppression, which is like embedded into us, which tries to get people to push people down between each other, rather than like in their thoughts by through arguments or through fights with stuff. And you always have it if you blame it, like if you blame someone that like, or blame, like people will take it as blame, and then that stops any kind of useful conversation because it's suddenly a personal attack rather than an advice or history or just a literal note.
Yeah, we really have to address that more. I know you spoke, obviously you mentioned children, but obviously, like, you know, it does have to start that lot early, because, you know, as a 9-year-old, I'd already, you know, internalized all these issues to the point of like cutting my own hair. So if someone had explained to me a little bit more, maybe it could have been my parents, but in a way, what I am going to defend is that they're the oppressed ones. They're the ones who are trying to fit in, and they're the ones who don't want to cause problems because they are the minority ethnic group or whatever. So it's difficult to expect the minority ethnic group to have that role. So it should be in more public realms of education and, I don't know, workshops with kids around different cultures. I think maybe that happens probably more so in very, very densely mixed heritage schools and stuff like that, maybe not so much in the ones that aren't, or we'd like to think so. Actually, it'd be interesting to find out a bit more. There was one thing I kind of was going to bring up a little bit, just out of interest of comparison, but I know there might be some out there who kind of there is like this reverse racism, whatever kind of argument, but from first-hand experience, having been to Zimbabwe and visited family, and in a country where you'd think, okay, well, in that case, everyone's going to be proud to be Black and have Afro hair and have braids. And actually, like, in Zimbabwe, they're all trying to straighten their hair as well. Like, it's not this thing suddenly like, you're in England, so I'm trying to do that. They're trying to do it there as well. So that it really does kind of go across the whole, well, the Western world have a lot to be responsible for. And also this aspirational trying whiteness, looking white aesthetically, is something that isn't just a problem in Britain. It happens, I think, so many more places, so it is kind of very much the global issue, I guess. I don't know if anyone else had anything to kind of share on that kind of note or that point. Jill?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like going around like Cambodia and Vietnam and Thailand, like when I was younger, and you know, it's like you're embraced in this like culture, and it's like you're trying to be as you know, as respectful and honourable as you can, as you still want to learn about stuff and see things and go places. And you know, I was still quite young and went to some full moon parties or whatever, but you still want to go and learn a little bit about the history and stuff like that. But there's a massive thing that really hit me when I was out there, was that yeah, like looking at all the skin bleaching and stuff, and seeing all this wonderful cultural thing, and like the history, and then being really, like you say, put off by people selling stuff in tourism, like what Ben was saying with the geishas and stuff. It's very tokenistic, like, but then having like internal arguments about whether if you're buying something off a person, they're going to benefit directly, but it's the media and the way that the like advertising stuff has made these people all over the world sort of look up to whiteness, and I just find that really uncomfortable.
Yeah, it's very awkward actually, isn't it? Because it's like everyone's trying to be more white, yet people who I associate with who are of white heritage don't have this kind of we're white and we're better. That comes from very much right-wing supremacy and stuff, and so it's like everyone's fighting for something that kind of doesn't really, I don't know, you know what I mean? I know white people have all the insecurities in the world about how they look, of course, yet it's still this aspiration that's kind of makes it all very delusional in a way. But we're humans, we're complex, and I don't know if we'll ever necessarily get to a point where things don't get appropriated. I think it's more a case that appropriation isn't a thing that happens so often. I think what we're trying to break things down to is that it's like this should be a very random, nuanced thing that happens every now and again, but it's actually really, really common. I don't know if anyone had anything more to kind of share off the back of that, or just anything else. I don't know if there was any stories that, obviously we've had a couple of stories, Cambodia and Japan. Oh, Chris, yeah.
I've just got a curiosity because I'm thinking now about thinking in a different way and more closely about the clothes that we buy and we wear. It's not that I don't think about what I'm going to wear. I tend to think about how colours will, dispose people towards me and things like that. But like you mentioned the denim that you're wearing, for instance. So I've been like wondering about that. Like when you put that on, are you like thinking about its sort of relevance culturally, or have you ever thought about that, or are you thinking about it now?
I think it's very much like if I was to give it an identity, and that is not to try and say that this is actually what is said, but this is what I would think. I'm like, okay, very kind of Western American culture. This is the look that I associate with that. Interestingly enough, to be contentious, like I think that anything that comes from America is fair game because they are the ultimate appropriators of everything. So I'm like, you know what? If I'm going to take this because I'm trying to look a little bit like a redneck, whatever, like that would be the question. However, I didn't really think that, like that's kind of something I'm saying in jest. But yeah, no, interesting point there. Thank you for coming back to that. I forgot about that. Yeah, carry on, Chris.
Yeah, so it's like it comes down to power relations, doesn't it? Because like sort of when like a non-dominant culture appropriates, it's about integration and like fitting in, or maybe it's about homage or pastiche, and actually critiquing the dominant culture there. And then when a sort of this large homogenous culture just sort of pulls stuff towards it like a moon or something, that's when it's a problem and it's actual. So that's when we need to ask questions, when we're sort of doing these things blindly. I go into a shop, I buy a stripy shirt. Where is it from? Can you tell me who's made it? Can you tell me what kind of design it is?
Yeah, we need to be more curious. Absolutely. Just for our own sake. I think we'll probably end up finding, the more curious you are, we'll probably find out actually there's a lot more to everything than we really think. We've not always got the time to do that, but I think, it needs to be a part of the process, part of the process of going to a festival, part of the process of buying clothes, part of the process of going to a market and seeing this, part of the process of going to eat certain foods and like understanding a little bit more. It would make everything a bit more interesting if we were able to be a bit more curious. I don't know. Thank you, Chris. Did anyone have anything else to kind of share on that point at all? Yeah, Joe, or anything else?
I guess, yeah, just one thing that I wanted to say was just when you were talking about where we're trying to get to with cultural appropriation is that, cultures like mixing and overlapping, like this is always gonna happen in some way, it's something that we can't put an entire stop to, but I guess the point that we're trying to get to is we're trying to get to a point where there aren't any power dynamics left in between cultures anymore, where we have reached a point of equality. And whenever we reach that point, that is when we can all share cultures equally, and cultural appropriation won't be an issue anymore.
Yeah, no, I think, I mean, that's the dream, really. It's not that much of a dream, you know. Potentially in 100 years we might not be here to see it, but I think having these conversations is literally is one way that we're going to get there. Absolutely, thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's a strange one with power dynamics, because I think someone's always going to be on top, aren't they? But we know in modern society, I know this is kind of an example of a place that is like westernized, but obviously like the leader in New Zealand seems to be showing all these very liberal approaches to governance that are working quite well, and we're led to believe that they can only be this elite, and then there's going to have to be this, but actually other places are doing it. It does exist. We have to be strong enough to kind of fight and push for it as much as possible. Power dynamics, yes, but maybe perhaps if we went too liberal in power, and then it would turn people more far right. But then you'd like to hope that the liberal powers would allow for the integration that we're looking for. The whole issue of racism is lack of integration. So if far left or more liberal parties came into play, they might be the people who can help us integrate. That's the hope, because there's always going to be something that we're going to argue about, obviously, but it shouldn't be race or racism anymore, and it shouldn't. We're all tired of it, I think, which is why we're all here. I don't know if there's any kind of like final hot takes, anything that anyone's not said so far or shared that anyone wanted to in particular. Yemi?
I guess much like one of my opening points, I think when we talk about appropriation, and when we think about potentially confronting is the wrong word, but maybe like speaking to somebody who may have appropriated something, I think it's that constant thing of trying to come at it from a place of calmness, as opposed to it being this rage-inducing thing. Because I think that the more you're more likely to have pushback, have this kind of like thing, if there is that blame game that Dee was talking about before, about like, that if we can just try to be as understanding as possible, then hopefully we can move forward into like better discussions about things, and rightly so, like what you said about, that we can share cultures in a way that is appropriate as opposed to appropriating.
I think further to that, like it's being, even if you don't understand, it's not being scared of not understanding, it's the fear of not understanding, because people feel inadequate, they feel dumb, they feel stupid, and these are just very human feelings, which actually, funnily enough, is probably the things that tie us together the most anyway as a species. Our emotional conscience is literally the reason why we're in this situation, but it's the one thing that we share. And if we are able to talk in a way that doesn't make someone feel silly for not understanding, we're probably well on our way to better times. I like to think, I do think. Did anyone else have a final kind of sharing or hot take, as they say? Okay, well, no, I think there's been loads of really amazing things shared. Thank you everyone for speaking. Thank you for your perspective, your questions, and this will be going out soon enough, hopefully towards the end of the month or next month, but I'll keep you all in the loop. And there might be some more, so we might do part 2 versions of these sessions with the same people, might mix it up, see how it goes. Gonna see what the response is, obviously, after putting it online, but just want to thank you all for being so brave and for joining today. So thank you, and I will speak to you all soon, hopefully. Have a good weekend.
Bye.
Bye. I'm so tired of beating around the, beating around the, beating around the. I'm so tired of beating around the, beating around the, beating around the. I'm so tired of